Right. So, I'm not sure whether people are sitting where they were yesterday, so it's not clear that this will be the most rational means of doing it. But in terms of who's on, say, this side of the room, who hasn't yet spoken about their project who would like to?
Privileges of that.
Hi, I'm William, and I'm from UC Riverside. Comparative literature on science and science fiction track, and my project is on Chinese internet literature, and there is a paper chapter website, and I'm looking into how the rhetoric of a harmonious society evolved into a rhetoric of censorship. Right.
Omar Rick's applying to graduate programs as we speak.
No one reads email while the talks are on, right? I mean, certainly I don't.
I'm interested in political ontologies, which I take to mean sort of starting with the structural positions that people experience their day-to-day lives living within. The most notable for me being those of within white supremacy, and from there proceeding to reevaluate Enlightenment era political philosophies, taking them apart. And I guess it sort of grew for me out of my background as a historian. One of the questions that I was coming up against a lot in researching African American and immigrant history in the United States was the question that now is, I guess, on a lot of Americans' minds: why do they hate us so much? Except for black people, it wasn't so much why do they hate us, but also why do they love us? Why do they kill us? Why do they fetishize us, our bodies? And the answers I was getting in history were not enough, and so I've just recently had to start coming to critical studies, critical theory, and cultural studies to gain a full appreciation of this, and looking at Lacan, looking at Fanon, looking at all these great folks that you guys look at routinely, I'm sure, but this is new stuff to me, so that's where my project is so far.
Hee Joo Son from UCLA in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures. I'm writing my dissertation right now, and I think almost finished. Let's hope I finish very soon. And my dissertation topic title is Casting Diaspora, Cultural Production, and Identity Construction. And I route the trajectory of movement of people from the peninsula into some of the largest and oldest diaspora communities. And I look at this history through artistic production that come together at specific sites. So one of my chapters deals with the 2002 Gwangju Biennial, and one project of that particular biennial was called There, and it brought together 24 visual artists from Kazakhstan, China, Japan, Brazil, and the US, which are sites of the largest and oldest Korean diaspora communities. And so I look at the evenness of cultural production of artists in these various regions that reflects the unevenness of modernity. But I was just sharing with Steve my recent kind of project/interest in the process of not being able to write for about a year because I had major writer's block, which if any of you have gone through in writing a dissertation, let's commiserate. But because I was driven crazy by my inability to think through my dissertation project, I started a new project on the space that I went to in order to relax, which is the Korean saunas in Los Angeles, Koreatown. And this project is called Thermotherapeutic Contact Zones. And basically, I take the whole contact zone notion from, obviously, Mary Louise Pratt, but in this place where I've been going to for the last 10 years as I was a graduate student in LA, I've noticed that the population of Korean saunas went from 90% Korean and 10% non-Korean to 90% non-Korean and 10% Korean at this one place that I've been frequenting as a patron. And so I started to think about the site as a place where I can think about the notion that in Pratt's idea of contact zone, in the contact zone between colonizers and colonized in remote regions of the world, where the colonizers often recreate situations and power dynamics that allows them to replicates their own positions of power. In this particular instance, in Koreatown today, you have the other, in this case, Korean sauna culture, kind of inculcating and teaching these non-Korean people. And these non-Korean people who come are everyone from Bel Air, Bel Air housewives to Mexican day laborers to demi-moore to obese people, and everyone's denuded in this space. And so basically that's my current project, and anyone who can help me think through this, the politics of the body in a space like this, I would really appreciate.
Right, and thanks also for acknowledging the issue of the difficulty often that people face in writing, and especially when they're under the specific forms of scrutiny and surveillance of the dissertation, because it's often a hard thing to face up to, confront, whatever, and sometimes it becomes easier when one shares it with others, I think. So that's much appreciated, I suspect, by many of us.
And in that, following that, Toby, I want to suggest that in a spirit of academic collaboration and interdisciplinarity, that we all go now, straight away, to a Korean sauna. Short of that, I'll talk about my project.
Anyone who wants to know what Naomi Campbell looks like naked, you can ask me.
I want the right side of the room to stay
Well, I'm Steve Clawson, and I'm here all the way from Cal State Los Angeles. It's been a huge trip. I'm an associate professor there in media studies, and I do have these historical connections to Lisa Parks and Rick Maxwell and a few other of the UW-Madison diaspora. And if you want to hear stories, let me know. But my current work is really, I was very much trained at Madison as a social historian of media, along with Lynn Spiegel and a few others there. And so my work has very much been social histories of television and radio, as well as talking about the cultural politics of popular radio and television. The way it's manifested itself most recently is, and I was sorry that I missed the SECT seminar last year, because it's really connected to religion. And I'm convinced that there's this kind of blind spot in progressive humanities research that's called religion, that not enough of us are taking it seriously. And so what I'm trying to do is, in short term, I'm looking at, in kind of shorter articles, I'm looking at the manifestations of spirituality but not religion in American popular television through television programs like Eli Stone, John from Cincinnati on HBO, some other series. That's kind of just short articles I'm writing and thinking about. The larger project actually is, I hope my second book will be talking about religious radio, and both historically and how that maps over the contemporary religious radio scene in the United States. And I'm particularly interested in terms of regional difference. Not thinking of radio and television necessarily as national or international phenomenon, but how it's practiced, thought about, contested within particular regions. You may not know this, but just one last historical tidbit is that Los Angeles in the 1920s and 30s really was the home of broadcast Christianity. And so being in Los Angeles, it's really a rich site for looking at how this particular religion was broadcast, disseminated, and fought over in Los Angeles and then distributed around the country.
I just want to say is you're absolutely right about the paucity of a critical theoretic response to issues of religion in the last 5 or 10 years or so. there's been a slew of work on political theology, which, after all, was what last year's SECT was about with Sabah Mahmood and so on. But the if you look at something like what was it? There's an SSRC blog site called The Imminent Frame, which is about questions of political theology with really factored around Charles Taylor's book on the secular age, right? And the entire debate, much of the debate in political theology, interestingly enough, but also revealingly enough, in contrast, is about secularism. So it's not about in the end, about the driving religious and theological issues, but about the tradition of Christianity that leads to secularism, and secularism as framed in terms of a kind of Christian religious framing, right? Rather than some of the more compelling issues. And that too is a paucity in the set of conversations that are taking place within this. I think you're absolutely right. And this is indeed important.
By the way, Steve was too modest to mention the content of his first book, which is really a classic of US television history, looking at racial struggles and regulation issues in the South in the 60s, with a particular television station that was failing to serve its local communities was, I think I'm right in saying this, Steve, had not shown things like the Nat King Cole show for racial reasons. It had been entirely racialized as white, and there was a kind of very moving, and his way of telling it is very moving, civil rights story of heroic intersections between social movements and liberal federal regulators to push what was essentially a Klan-driven station in many ways into something that was genuinely serving the local community to the extent that a network affiliate could be said to do that. Is that a fair summary?
It is fair, and the one thing I would just add on to that is that Rick earlier today was talking about the broadcast reform movement, which we think of now in the moment as being something relatively new. But the particular case I'm talking about in Mississippi really was part of the catalyst, the spark for the broadcast reform movement of the 60s, which did fundamentally change, not things a whole lot structurally, but it fundamentally changed something very important, and that was the access of women and African Americans to employment in media industries. And so it really changed the EOC rules, and it changed some other things in minor structural ways that really fundamentally changed the face of television as we know it in the 60s and 70s.
Hi. I'm Doug Tewksbury. I'm at Penn State in the College of Communications. And actually, before I begin, I should say Hee Joo was nice enough to offer me a ride to Los Angeles, so you're going to see us both stand up after all the presentations. But we wanted to stay here for just to hear what everybody else was doing. So when we stand up, we're not leaving because of the quality of content of the presentations. Or maybe. In any case, my research generally focuses around two areas. One is critical security studies, which is looking the way that new technologies, especially media technologies, are being used as part of the war on terror and by the Department of Homeland Security. So much of my research looks at new models of labor and new types of technology and the way that those are being used for homeland security or insecurity. But my dissertation is problematizing the idea of culture and warfare. One of the questions that I had, I like the work of Hart and Negri and Agamben and Berillio very much, but one of the problems with, I think, their work is that they're a little light on specifics of what these processes look like at the site of production. So as a result, I'm looking at music as a site of production and how music is used as a weapon of warfare through cultural forms by looking at several case studies.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Vartan. I'm in the same department as William at UCR in comparative literature. And I have three concurrent research areas. The first one is actually related to the question I had for Angela this morning. I'm co-editing a collection of essays that deals with human representation, not the human representation of animals, and I'm also co-authoring the introduction, which is taking a lot of my current time and is sort of impeding on the writing of my dissertation prospectus, which is titled Blissful Errancy Strategies for Describing Modernity. And what I'm looking at is the process of canon deformation, in the sense that looking at fiction not as a sort of fictional genre and exploring genre boundaries, but looking at the ways in which fiction actually articulates its own theory and theories of modernity as well. And at the same time looking at the immersive and affective dimension of the act of reading rather than the act of writing. And in that I look at, of course, canonical works and the ways in which they dehistoricize themselves and escape sort of inscription within canonical canonical inscription. Also, I'm looking at performance studies, film, and painting and theater. And the third area of interest, and I don't see Miriam in the room, so I feel free to speak about that, is actually to look at the disciplinarization of comparative literature in as a sort of department, and the ways in which comparative literature has been approached through the focus of national literatures and sort of exploring the idea of national literatures, but looking at really literature as a category that explodes national boundaries, and also try to investigate the possibilities for interdisciplinary work. So I'm quite interested in the ways in which thriving on Lisa Park's sort of critical methodology, exploration of new critical methodologies, how we can use new critical methodologies in those, what Juan has called the text-based disciplines, and the ways in which we perhaps look for different directions for investigation in these areas.
Hi, I'm Caroline Gerlitz. I'm at Goldsmiths College at 2 departments, Media and Communication and Sociology. And I'm just about to finish my master on gender and culture. And before I came to the UK, I was very involved inside the creative industries. I've done a course which main aim was to create the perfect subject to work in creative industries, in advertising agencies, and they already got me. I was working in advertising agencies and branding agencies, but yeah, then I decided no, that's not enough. So I escaped from Germany, went to the UK, and yeah, try to combine my experience and with my academic work. I'm just finishing a project on new marketing and sexuality, how the new approaches to, within branding to involve consumers in campaigns and to create some kind of interactive, collaborative campaigns are being hyped within advertising agencies, and how these campaigns use sexuality in a different, maybe in a different way than mass media campaigns do. And it was very interesting to do some interviews with people in working in advertising and branding, and to listen to them how they celebrate the whole idea of mass creativity and the crowdsourcing. Yeah, my second project that is about to come in autumn will be my PhD, which is on gender and brands more in general, and the title is Gender and Brands from Hegemony to the Simultaneities of Flow. And I'm trying to move away from a focus on a sole focus on ideology when it comes to analyze advertising, the impact of advertising and brands on gender, and try to use the object-oriented method that Angela was talking about this morning from Scott Lash and Celia Lurie to analyze how brands and campaigns and the way campaigns use gender circulate within society, within different discussions. And yeah, and before I stop, somebody has lost some bracelets. They always return.
Hi, I'm Ramon Lobato from University of Melbourne in Australia, and yes, in Australia we, you know, the creative industries get spoken about a lot, both as a kind of planning, urban planning methodology, you know, approach, and also as a kind of pedagogical kind of, you know, tool or you know, frame, and so yes, and they're also quite contested in all kinds of ways too. So it's been fantastic to learn even more, to learn a lot more in the last couple of days. So I'm in a cultural studies program, and I mostly do film and media studies within that. And I guess my interests are kind of in like different types of materialist kind of media studies, and also the possibility or otherwise of a transnational media studies. And I'm working on a PhD thesis. I've been doing it for about 2 years, and the title is Sub-Cinema, Mapping Informal Film Distribution. And it started out from a kind of curiosity about the politics of distribution, like who gets to see what and under what circumstances, and, you know, why bother making films that no one gets to see, those kind of questions. So some of the things we've been talking, well, you know, it's an issue. And, well, you know, like the film festival circuit as a circuit, for instance, you know, I'm so glad it exists. It gives me lots of pleasure, but it's an elite circuit. It's a closed circuit, and it's policed by all kinds of class, you know, policing mechanisms and all kinds of things. So it's deeply problematic. And so the whole kind of, you know, underground commercial thing that, you know, plagues film studies is, you know, is problematic too. So anyway, so I've been looking at different kinds of circulatory networks, like commercial circulatory networks that aren't underground but that are marginal. So I've been looking at things like telemovies, like the adult industries, like certain types of diasporic networks, these kind of things, and looking at how they operate and trying to find out where the money goes and how it goes around, and, you know, this kind of thing. So I've become mostly interested in informal and semi-formal kind of distributive economies. And I've built up a couple of case studies around it. So I look at different types of piracy, I look at straight-to-video releasing, and also I have a chapter on Nollywood, the Nigerian film industry, which is very, very successful film industry, which is completely informal. So I guess one of the things I'm trying to do is ask questions of, like, the Australian film industry or the British film industry or whatever, like, kind of, you know, like, what can we learn from other kinds of distribution networks in terms of policy, and how can you make policy for informal economies, that kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Joanne Shoe. I'm from the program in American Culture at the University of Michigan, and I'm at this phase right now where I'm about to start working on my dissertation prospectus and thinking about how I can take a smaller project that I've worked on and make it into a bigger one. The smaller project has to do with this museum in Berlin. It's called the Pergamon Museum, and it houses this huge cultural artifact called the Pergamon altar. This altar has taken on different kinds of national meanings for Germany, but at the same time, it's also an ancient Greek artifact that's been moved around across national borders at certain times, such as during World War II, when it was taken to the Soviet Union. So I'm hoping to expand this project so I can further look at these ideas of alternate mappings and territories. For example, I find Lisa's idea of the footprint really compelling because one way in which I might be able to look at different territories is to look at the repetition of the uses of classical architecture in different ways, and to think of that as a kind of territory as opposed to being restricted by specific national boundaries. So that's basically my project, and it's still sort of, there's still room to develop, and it has to develop a lot before I actually start writing this thing. So that's pretty much it.
Hi, I'm Xenopus Honor. I'm at UCL London doing my part-time MA in the history of art. Before I went into the history of art, I was, I guess, introduced to cultural studies at a very sort of political and theoretical environment, and I was sort of, I really enjoyed that, and I found it really inspiring, but at the same time, that was at LSE, and I found the sort of general environment a bit too political, and I guess I wasn't ready to go on to a PhD, so I got interested in people like Susan Buck-Morss, who looked at the sort of political aspect of visual arts, and then I decided to go into visual arts myself and worked for a gallery for a year where they had it was called the Rifle Maker Gallery, where they had quite sort of alternative, not too commercial exhibitions with artists both working in sort of the political arena as well as trying to sell their work. And then that's when I started my sort of MA in history of art, focusing on contemporary art, just to have more of a sort of background in the aesthetic field study. So now I'm sort of thinking about doing a PhD and really just, you know, stealing everyone's ideas. No, but yeah, so that's where I am.
Hey, hello, I'm Linda. I'm at UCR, Sociology Department. I actually have a lot of different research interests, and I'm working on 2 different projects. The first one is related to transnational social movements. I'm part of a research group at my university, and we specifically look at the World Social Forum as an open space for different activists, scholars, community groups, you know, some members of NGOs, etc., and kind of looking at the types of issues activists are interested in, the kinds of alliances that are being built, etc. From that, you know, group, we've produced lots of papers on different topics and different types of activism. Most recently, we just finished papers on kind of the politics of representation at the World Social Forum, specifically looking at race as a factor and also the way that people responded to questions about race. You know, for example, when we were in Brazil, you know, we passed out over like 600 surveys, and we also did participant observations. But in our surveys, one of our questions was just, you know, just straight out, what is your race? Blank. And, you know, most people of color had no problem identifying it, answering it, because people of color often ask what they are, and they know exactly what they are. But we got a lot of interesting comments, particularly from white folks, people from Europe who refused to answer the question, saying that it was actually very racist that we included that question. So this kind of brought up a lot of methodological issues. So we wrote a paper addressing that. The most recent paper that I'm working on related to that topic has to do with labor activists, and we're actually comparing labor activists at the World Social Forum. We're mostly focusing in Nairobi, but we're also looking at the data that we collected in Porto Alegre and comparing it to the labor activists here at the U.S. Social Forum, which, you know, the United States just had their first one. And again, we're kind of looking at their political differences, viewpoints, the kinds of alliances and coalitions they're building, both within the movement as well as cross-movement. So I thought that was really interesting, you know, also when Rick was talking about different movements and how there is a need for collaboration. And certainly from our observations and looking at our data, we saw that the labor movement here in the United States, and a lot of the activists are actually quite radical and are really actively trying to pursue these coalitions and alliances, and they have, you know, different kind of solutions, both community-based and also looking at more transnational levels. So we have accounts of different types of successful examples and some tensions that also exist. My second research that I'm working on is actually related to my dissertation, and I'm just about to hopefully finalize my prospectus. Toby's my chair. I keep telling him for the last month, oh, I'll get you my final draft in a week or two. So I'm really going to send it to you a week or two from now. But no, I'm on a tight schedule. So for my dissertation, I'm also interested in feminist cultural studies, and so I am looking at the cultural significance of the series Sex and the City, and I do feminist and queer theory, so I was also then very excited that Angela mentioned those theoretical paradigms before I did. I didn't want to be the first sociologist bringing up all these theory stuff that people don't really do here. But I'm planning to interview fans of the series and kind of look into whether they buy into the hegemonic narratives that are embedded in the text, which is what most scholars in media studies have been kind of critiquing the show with, as well as analyzing blogs, websites, reviews of the show. You know, I was actually very excited that the movie came out, and to me the success of the movie is a huge reflection of the popularity of the show, and you know, I'm finding that people have something to say about the show, you know, whether they like it or they don't, so it's certainly making some type of impact.
I'm Lisa Aristia, and I'm going to try and do lightning now that you over there have explained to me what that means. So I'll begin by saying that I've always been obsessed with how whiteness sticks around. and maintains itself. And I guess before I got to grad school, I used to be the principal of a high school, and I was in education, and always did a lot of work around race and whiteness with kids between the ages of 14 and 18. And then I got traumatized in Chicago, opening a school and then shutting it down. And so then I decided to go to grad school to relax. And I'm at the University of Minnesota in the Department of American Studies, and I'm a 43-year-old grad student, the oldest in the department, maybe even older than my professors, and certainly than my advisor. And one day I was sitting in one of the fathers of American Studies classroom, David Noble, and one of my cohort members said something about this thing about blood quantum and how she had to prove how much Indian blood she had in order to get a certain scholarship to come to the grad school. And I ignorantly had no idea about this, and it started this obsession. And so here's the lightning. Focusing on the last decades of the 19th and 20th centuries, I'm looking at the racial itinerancy of liberalism and the similar ways in which blacks and American Indians have tried to access the economic and cultural properties of whiteness through the very same liberal processes used to deny them these properties. I'm using 4 specific cultural responses to this accessing and denial as study lenses, such as black kids who rely on the identification "I'm part Cherokee" as a way to trade out or escape conceptual blackness, the rejected and doubtful applications for authentic Indian identity and citizenship of freedmen in Indian Territory, which was a system designed and performed by the federal government, the recent expulsion of the descendants of freedmen from the Cherokee Nation, and the nationalisms that have been produced from both sides, blacks and Cherokee, and art's response to common criminalizations of blacks and Indians during the Clinton years. I don't have a title yet. I'm ABD, have been ABD for about 6 months, I guess. And who is the writer's block person? Oh my God. This is the summer of writer's block. And possible titles: The Racial Destinations of Liberalism, or Doubtful, or To Whom Did You Belong? And that's it.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Perry, and I'm at the University of California, Riverside, in the Department of English, and I'm hoping to be completing my qualifying exams. It is a competition, I guess, on some level, but completing those soon enough, hopefully by October. Working on a dissertation under the invaluable direction of Dr. Toby Miller. That at its base, it focuses on life writing, art, performances, and other publicized, I guess, personal expressions created by sex workers in contemporary societies. Right now, most of the research I've done is US-based, but I'm hoping for the dissertation it's going to expand beyond that. As a brief background in sort of how I'm approaching it, at least in one section, a lot of the recent publications of this genre include a variety of ephemera along with the sort of personal narrative part. So things like photos, letters, diary entries, receipts sometimes. Heidi Fleiss's has like schedules and business cards, some of them still with working numbers, which is really interesting. Legal documents, contracts. So a lot of this type of sort of almost metatextual elements to them. And so in part what I'm focusing on is how these particular works speak to a sense of fragmentedness of this sort of scrapbook subject, eradicating traditional boundaries of the self and the printed word, the reproduced image, and considering sort of how this not only deconstructs the sort of traditional autobiography or autobiographer, but how this also speaks to sex work as a whole, potentially as a field, and the narratives coming out of it. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Xuanhao Liao from Taiwan. I'm currently working on 2 book projects. The first one is on an 18th century classical Chinese novel called The Dream of the Red Chamber. Maybe some of you have read it. This book witnessed a very important historical juncture where the burgeoning indigenous Chinese modernity was almost destroyed by an invading nomadic tribe called the Manchus, which established the Qing dynasty. What I'm doing is I'm investigating how that moment, that was a very traumatic moment, how that moment of trauma, of contact, kind of to quite an extent set the terms for China's encounter with the way China encountered Western modernity, and what kind of reverberations that actually persist all the way into the present time. Yeah. And in the second book project, I'm looking at modern Taiwanese cultural text, especially film text, including the most recent Ang Lee film, Lust Caution, to see how a peripheral Taiwanese society, peripheral Chinese society, Taiwan, can strike back at the idea of China-centrism or Sinocentrism by pioneering the idea of post-Chineseness by becoming post-Taiwanese first, right? By means of a cyborgian politics, which I call a politics of amorphousness, because Taiwan is a nation state and not a nation state, a place and a non-place. China calls us a renegade province, and we call ourselves a state, but few countries in the world recognize Taiwan as a state. So things like that, yeah. But anyway, Taiwan, the Taiwanese society lives in a kind of amorphousness. We kind of change all the time, yeah. So that's the second project. My most recent field of interest is cultural policy. Like I mentioned the other day, I was invited to write up the cultural policy platform for the current president, who's running for mayorship a couple of years ago of Taipei. And in that policy platform, I suggested that a cultural department be founded for Taipei City. And then I was invited to be the second director for that department for 3 years and 9 months. And I've accumulated a whole load of experience, which I like to theorize. But as a critical cultural studies scholar, I found my vocabulary was kind of still not sufficient for this task. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
US who are hoping for post-Chineseness, maybe in about a century. So if you can give them some predictions, that'll be very helpful.
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm from UCLA, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. And I'm one of those text-based people who's trying to get out of her comfort zone, and I've definitely made it. So I'm working on Chilean post-dictatorship film, and I've chosen Chile because it's exceptional in the sense that the transition to democracy is often cited as paradigmatic and all of that sort of thing, but it's also representative in the sense that it's a very small market for film, and for example, there are 15 million people in the country and 11 million tickets sold per year, which means less than one per person per year. And only 7% of those tickets are Chilean films. So my question is, why make film in Chile? Because there's obviously no money in it, and it's very difficult to get funding. So I'm interested in looking at how these conditions of production affect or might reverberate in the productions themselves. So my plan is to look at 3 kind of thematic categories of Chilean film from 1990 to 2005 and look at what I'm calling genealogies of these films. Who made them, with what funding, and that sort of thing, and see if any of the coincidences in these thematic categories can be attributed to those conditions of production.
My name is Paul Amar. I'm in the Law and Society program of UC Santa Barbara. I have a PhD in political science, so this is an obvious place for me to hang out with you all. But I do basically political sociology and kind of multi-site urban ethnography of police, looking at basically militarization around what we're calling here cultural creative industries, or in two cities that are super saturated with culture. We're actually not, the development of culture isn't a problem, it's the supersaturation with colonial residual forms of culture as well as new revivalist forms of culture. I'm working on Rio de Janeiro, which is or the world capital of tropicalism and certain kinds of black Atlanticism and other kinds of gay utopianism and various forms of heavily culturalized, globally fetishized forms, circulating forms of culture. And then Cairo, a capital or the capital of Orientalism and post-neocolonial Orientalism, as well as kind of Discovery Channel Pharaonism and Islamic revivalism, and yes, lots of sexyisms. So I think, in a sense, there's a kind of, and instead of looking at deregulation and the neoliberal state through practices of marketization and deregulation, I look very much at new elaborated forms of coercion and policing as cultural entrepreneurs, as violent cultural entrepreneurs, producing forms of masculinity and culture that bound, control, and extract new forms of profit from these post-colonial cities. So basically what I'm here for, and what I've really learned a lot about here, is these forms of creative and culturalist citizenship that circulate and that are taught and that are discussed in policy circles worldwide. And it's really helped me to think much more clearly about how different, but yet in a kind of a shadow version, that these police networks worldwide and these private sector training camps where militarized police are trained talk constantly about culture. They talk about some of the same figures we talk about here, or that Richard Florida talks about. They talk about, you know, the gay man as a marker of a certain kind of creativity. They talk about certain kind of entrepreneurial women in fashion, and then what I talk about a lot in the sex industry as being both a very negative or dangerous factor in the city, but as something which is intimately and explicitly linked to globalization. So basically I'm seeing a lot of parallels that's helping me define and helping me pinpoint exactly what is going to be specific and maybe a contribution of my work on these police training and cultural conversation circuits that I'm looking at.
Hi, my name is Kareem Tartusier. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University. And I'm working on the rise of new media practice in Egypt that is dovetailing with the neoliberal forms of Islamism. So I'm looking at the new moment in political Islam and how it's kind of reorganizing the cultural scene. And it's been very helpful to have this, to be part of this conversation here, and because most of what we're talking about is in relationship to the state and state policies, so I'm kind of trying to expand this conversation to look at kind of other forms of political organization that is, in the case of Egypt, is competing with the state in, monopolizing a form, the culture scene and organizing it. So I'm looking specifically at the circulation, the transnational circulation of Islamic programming, whether it's film or television shows on transnational satellite channels, or even fashions that are fashion that is Islamically inflected, so veiling as fashion, and that is becoming an industry in itself, not only by global brands like Nike designing the burkini, for example, but also by local designers. So kind of, my work, kind of builds on Sabah Mahmood's work, but differs from it in a sense that, it's not about like veiling as self-fashioning or kind of the autonomous, the creation of new autonomous subjectivities, but more about, the veil as fashion, and how the conscription of actors, in promoting this kind of veiled or Islamically inflected fashion lines and so forth. So this is what I'm working on now.
So my name is Rizvana Braxton, and I'm a PhD student at Duke in the literature department. And I have a summary, so I'm just going to read it. So I'm working to develop a variety of critical approaches to contemporary fashion, which entails looking at fashion in its material specificity. And some of the designers I look at include working right now Mario Schwab, Gareth Pugh, Reka Kubo, Comme des Garçons, Boudica, and a variety of Belgian designers included in the original Antwerp 6. In this respect, I'm interested in the expanding ways in which fashion is interrogating traditional organizing principles of social structures, of existing social structures, how fashion may introduce new ideas that have a profound engagement with society, urban planning, and I guess since I've been so well informed these past few days, ecological policies. But in this, I'm also informed by the work of certain textile artists, for example, Lucy Orda, who's a visual artist at the London College of Fashion. I'm also interested in the varieties of ways in which fashion, specifically the wearing of clothing, can be understood and critically assessed as kind of like compelling a thinking about embodiment or different embodied experiences. I'm interested in developing a phenomenological account of fashion, the ways in which we might be able to reflect on the work of someone like Hussein Chalayan and develop a notion of dwelling, or the ways in which fashion provokes an idea of like the bodily occupation of space, and how this connects up with various ideas about the construction of urban identity, or what is sometimes referred to as the urban nomad. And I haven't found it yet, but I'm looking for a critical way of assessing the material changes happening in practices of design currently, and then from there trying to evaluate the possible emergence of a political imagination from such material changes. And I'm looking at the work of a media collective in London specifically called Show Studio that was started by Nick Knight, the photographer, and an extended project that they've recently started called Political Fashion, which is all online, and if you haven't seen it, it's really great. So.
Spoken yet who'd like to? So what I'm going to suggest then is we take a 5-minute break. The tea